Welcome, everybody, to the first Multi-usiverse podcast. My name is Garr Punnett. We hope that this is going to be a journey of our podcast that we will have with various stakeholders that we've met in the industry. I've had the privilege of meeting many of these inspiring leaders in person. These are the types of leaders that we look forward to working with at Reaply. And we've just, again, get to take a moment and actually have really, hopefully, interesting conversations all around the solutions that we are working for in the sustainability and circular economy space. I'm joined by today, Stephanie Barger, Director of True, a zero waste program. Stephanie, what is the difference between zero waste and zero waste to landfill?
Thank you, Garr, and thank you for having me. I want to provide a little history. So zero waste to landfill really came out of Japan. So it's a small island. They don't have a lot of room for landfills. And so they were focusing on moving all of their waste from landfills and then unfortunately burning them. But they did have three pillars, and it was zero waste to landfill, zero waste to incineration, and then zero mining. So that's the ultimate goal. So because of a lot of the leaders in sustainability happen to be the companies coming from Japan. So Ricoh Electronics, Toyota, Honda, and they really, a lot of them brought that to the US. And we all know that Japan is very, very efficient and very mindful. Toyota, of course, came up with the Lean Path program. So that came over to the US and was spreading globally, and everybody was trying to get, we don't want to send it to landfill. And that has been a lot of confusion in the industry because a lot of companies say they're zero waste to landfill, but then they burn anywhere from 30 to 60% of their waste. And that's actually how we came about, because the companies we were working with, they said, it's apples and pineapples out there. And so a company can say they're zero waste to landfill and there's no equal. And so we developed our certification to help hopefully stabilize that. And so for us, we use the Zero Waste International Alliance definition and really the circular economy and closed loop, which is about not sending any waste to landfill, incineration, waste to energy, and the environment. And I think a lot of times we forget about in the environment. And that not only can include solid waste, but the chemical waste, air emissions, water emissions, land emissions. So hopefully that sets a really good foundation for everybody listening.
Absolutely. And thank you for highlighting that. Let's start really kind of from the beginning on developing this certification. When did this become a passion? What was the team like around in the beginning? How did you all really get your foothold in the industry to really sort of make this footprint on redefining sort of certification and where we should all be focusing on in the zero waste space?
Terrific. Thank you. So for me personally, I had a nonprofit, a community-based nonprofit called Earth Resource Foundation, and we have a large high school program. And because we were located along the coast in Orange County, California, we were doing tons of beach cleanups, river cleanups, and of course, it doesn't work, right? The next day, there's more trash. And so our high school students literally went upstream and started identifying where all this waste was coming from. And through that, we met many of the zero waste champions and experts, the grandfathers and grandmothers, if you will, of the movement, and also the companies that were really leading the charge. And many of them I had mentioned before. And we started having conferences, because we didn't really know how to do it. The businesses were figuring it out. So we had these great conferences and workshops. And of course, a lot of this was when bioplastic was being introduced. And is that a good thing, a bad thing, a solution, an alternative? And then, all of this in the environmental arena and any, social, human justice, it's about collaboration, right? It's about community. So we brought together this big community, which included partnering with the local U.S. Green Building Council chapters. And of course, that's our parent organization that we work with now. And they have this amazing program called LEAD. It was developed 25 years ago. And I talked to the president at the time, Rick Frondizi, and I said, I'm copying you, right? Because all these businesses had come together and it's like, where's the certification for zero waste? So,
Well,
as they say,
I love that story, and you've got the headline right there that hopefully people completely recognize, which is this is now a certification that is now so mainstream that for everyone who's at least somewhat conscious of a building's footprint, they see LEED. They see LEED on buildings. They see LEED. That almost sometimes when I'm speaking to people who are not familiar with circular economy or sustainability, they automatically go to that certification because it's the thing that has probably the most amount of recognition in the building space. So I love that idea, and I kind of want to unpack then what it was like to learn and to collect that knowledge, because I think you're right. There are so many ways that we can learn from what's been done. And so in that capacity, you were like, wait, LEED has organized a lot of the playbook for how this could work. That is an easier statement for you to say. What was the aha moment probably in that moment? You're like, wait, there's a blueprint here. I can actually follow this and create something that the industry really needs.
Yeah, and it was really about working with the local and national global U.S. Green Building Council folks. They're brilliant. They've been in this forever, and they leverage the business community, right? So in grassroots, we're like trying to sign petitions and do press conferences, and it's thousands and thousands of hours. And it's important work, but it takes years to get a little something done. And to me, the aha moment was to replicate this throughout the world and spread the good word, if you will, of zero waste and circular economy. And so, and we had all these brilliant partners. I named many of the companies before, but everybody from like the Del Mar Fairgrounds, who was going zero waste, to Strauss Family Farms, to wineries, to manufacturing, and office buildings. Disneyland was one of our first projects we worked on. And so just bringing together this think tank of brilliant people, but we just didn't have a framework or a mechanism to put that in. And so we developed the U.S. Zero Waste Business Council to start that journey.
That's so reminds me of our early phases of Reaply, where, often in the tech space that I find myself in now and that Reaply finds itself in is we're sort of actually called upon to do things that don't scale. And it's often in those moments where you're forced to really reckon with a problem, where you're trying to figure out a solution. It is so manual for you to take on that effort.
Yes.
But that still is where all the learnings are. That's where you're breaking down the status quo system and really understanding where your intervention points are, really where you can actually design something that's better, and then start to take all of those learnings and build it into something that can really impact and grow across an industry. And so I think I actually hadn't realized that in our interaction, where all of these solutions share the same origin, which is seeing the problem, breaking it down, and trying to find those intervention points to build something new.
Exactly. And having a passionate group of people around you that, and that's what I love about zero waste and the whole journey is it's non-competitive, right? So I've had Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon in the same room trying to figure out how do they deal with composite materials, which are very complicated. We've had Whole Foods and Safeway visit Albertsons distribution center because they turned their distribution center into their own private MRF. They were like, we're done with the recycling and waste industry, and they just backhauled everything, sorted it themselves, and once again that intervention of finding where those problems and challenges are. And so what Albertsons did is, because they were sorting everything, they realized like what wasn't easy to sort, right? So you have a great bucket that's plastic can easily be recycled, a handle that's metal, easily recyclable, but it takes a lot of labor to pull them apart. And once again, this is the beauty and the where the big change happens is when you bring in your whole supply chain. So they brought in their vendors and said you have to redesign your buckets. They all have to be plastic, same type of plastic. And of course, the vendor said, no, it's too costly. And when you get these big companies, unlike when you're a community group or grassroots group, they have the power to shift to another vendor. And so, of course, the vendor changed their mind and said, okay, we'll do it. And most of these changes, they're not about taking years and years to do. They take a couple of months. And then everybody saves. And that's the beauty, once again, of zero waste, is everybody along the supply chain saves, and it becomes more profitable.
What advice do you have then for someone who recognizes there's a problem within their own organization, is working on thinking of a solution, but is trying to engage in that change management? And that difficulty in moving what is typically a larger organization because they have the most impact, but they also positively have the most impact around spurring on change. What advice do you have in there for that person where it's like, how do you make the case? What have you felt that you needed to do where it was like you need to go that extra mile to really highlight how this could work? What do you have to say to that person who's listening right now?
So I think I'm going to give a shameless plug. It's Become a True Advisor. It's an online training program.
I like it. Yes.
Yes. Because you have to have the resources, but more importantly is zero waste is a team sport, right? So you need to bring everybody together. Don't try and solve it by yourself. Bring in your vendors, bring in your service providers, have a lunch and learn, have a little powwow, because your vendors, they also want to get to zero waste and they're having these same issues. And so bringing this in, and then I always tell people, don't go down the rabbit holes. You can spend a lot of time, on the internet or just calling the wrong people or calling, an organization, but that maybe isn't one of our experts. So I always say, I don't know everything, but I know people that do. And, it's not rocket science. So, it's about processing that and working with people. The other thing is to involve your employees, because employees, they know what's wrong, especially if you're in manufacturing. They know what's working, what isn't, and this is all about being efficient. So they know what's being wasteful along the manufacturing line.
That's so true.
They know, even with retail, when early on before our certification, the main call that I get, because we were very involved in plastic pollution, is I would have the sales clerk at a retail store, what do we do with plastic film? Because they were so frustrated. They saw it was wasteful. And so it's just about bringing everybody together, having those conversations, and then bringing in the experts. And a lot of those experts are, Surfrider Foundation, World Wildlife Fund, ReFed, thinking outside the box. So it isn't just about zero waste, but it's about those materials. We brought in the coal miners, the fight against the coal mining and strip mining in West Virginia, and they had the most powerful effect on the employees and where people were going with their programs.
I think that's what I love about that is, again, how it breaks it down to its parts, which is isn't, I think what you said in commonly said, obviously, but this isn't rocket science, where it's like, this is a question of economics, materials, and supply chain. And when we can really sort of almost drill down in each one of these categories, sometimes the answers actually reveal themselves. And, you start to really take for granted the status quo. And then once somebody sees that problem, then starts to break it down, and then you bring in, again, your colleagues or even the employees of an organization, that's where the real knowledge can take hold. Because I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where we become almost a convener. So we bring a bunch of people into the room, and then once a bunch of people enter the room, they start sharing and talking, and the solutions almost happen organically, where things start to get aggregated, things start to actually gain value now that they've been moved to a certain volume. And now we can actually find a place that will buy it, find a place that maybe will be able to take it or recycle it, or find a way, some sort of elimination point where we don't have to use that thing at all. And I think that's what's fun is to your point earlier too about collaboration, is that's actually the fun part, is not being afraid to ask the questions, not being afraid to send the invites, put yourself out there, convene some sort of organization or some sort of group of partners, and then start that conversation. And I think that's where I think you and I both find a lot of joy in what we do and bringing those people together.
Definitely. And if I can add 2 more tips.
Please.
Don't go digging through your dumpster. Dig through your purchase agreements and purchase contracts.
I love that.
Because it's a lot funner and cleaner and more enjoyable. But if everything you're purchasing is returnable, repairable, reusable, donatable, recyclable, and compostable, you're zero waste, right? And then you're also making sure that those materials are made from recyclable or compostable materials, right? So you're closing the loop. Because we don't do anybody any good, right, if we're not closing the loop, if we're not purchasing that. And then the other big tip is focus on the majority of your materials. Don't worry about the little lean cuisine lunch packet. I mean, you need to figure that out. But look at, what's making up 30% of your material stream or 50% of your material stream, and focus on that. And this is from Ryan McMullen with Toyota, but this was their slogan, is recycle some. So just get your recycling programs going, recycle more, recycle everything you can. So that means, going through every bin, make sure it's source separated and you're turning it into commodities. And then you want to recycle less, which means you take that baler of cardboard and you're like, why do we have all this cardboard? And you start reducing and reusing. So recycle some, recycle more, and then recycle less. And I think that's a great mantra for us all to go by.
And I think this is good to point out too for some that might be new to this. These volumes are not insignificant at a level of Toyota, and that when you speak to a lot of these organizations, by really, I mean, I have, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I have a certain amount of empathy for large organizations because, again, they've been operating under a different paradigm for a long time. Now just the game is changing, and we need to figure out the new rules. And so when it comes to actually engaging in these with these organizations and saying, hey, now we are here to help you in what the future needs, not what the system is right now, that the volumes are significant and the re-education around, I think to your point, okay, let's look at recycling first and then actually studying, well, do we need this box at all? And I've loved seeing so many companies rethink their packaging entirely, not even at the consumer level. These are people rethinking internal use packaging that no consumer sees, that can sometimes be a pain to deal with on the employee standpoint, and eliminating it just because someone raised their hand and said, hey, why do we use these particular widgets on this particular load of items? And it eliminates literal tons of material from an operation. So I think that's what's really fun about, again, somebody just raising their hand and identifying that source, whether that's in that recycling bin or just somewhere on the facility floor. I want to then real quickly then, if we could take back to, I am very interested in the conversation that you had with LEED and where that played into True joining LEED. And that those conversations where it was, can we do more together? How did that all start? I mean, where True was growing as a certification, LEED being in the game for a long time, the U.S. Green Building Council being involved for a long period of time. What was that sort of, I don't want to call it an acquisition, I don't know what term to use, but what was that like where they said, you know what, it's time, and you all both agreed that it was time to sort of join under the same umbrella?
Yeah, so I think, early on establishing those relationships at the local level and even the national level. And, once again, it's about collaboration. So not being afraid to invite other certifications to our conferences and to share. So that's what really started it. And I have to applaud Mr. Gary Liss. He was really instrumental. He was on our founding board for the U.S. Zero Waste Business Council. And he really made sure that we were working with the lead certification team, the experts. They were presenting, and then at our conferences, we'd bring in like 20 people, and from their teams, our teams, and we just really talk through where are the synergies? How can we support one another? Where is lead going and where is true going? And then from that, it was actually magical because I received a call in early 2016, and they said that their senior leadership wanted to mentor me. And, you never turn down a mentorship, right? And so Peter Templeton, who's now our new CEO at U.S. Green Building Council, he was really my mentor, and he worked with myself and the entire board to see what would be the best pathway, and we determined that a full acquisition, because we were a grassroots organization, right? I mean, there was me and 1.5 other people running a national organization, and we were doing good, but I was the marketer, the payroll,
you were working a lot,
and so to have that opportunity, and Mahesh happened to be the CEO at that time, and so in 2016 at the Greenbelt LA conference, that's where we signed the papers. And so we're a nonprofit, they're a nonprofit, so there is no exchange of money or anything like that. They just acquired us and our assets, and so legally, that's how you maintain a nonprofit. You don't cash out. It goes with the another nonprofit or gets donated. So it's been an amazing to have their expertise, to have their infrastructure. And, so they help, with their expertise and funding, we were able to put our zero waste advisor program that was only in person and took a lot of time and money. They developed the online platform. And then, of course, they have this global staff that, has been pushing LEAD, and there are many other programs, and they're established in all these different countries. So they already had the relationships. And then with ours, so it's been so exciting, and of course their amazing marketing and being highlighted at Greenbuild Conference, which is 15,000-20,000 people. So it really launched us, and we continue to work closely with the LEED certification team. And one of the reasons they brought us in is because they're really good on the green building, but on the waste and how to handle that. It was good, but theirs was 50 to 75% diversion, where our minimum is 90%. And so we're working even closer. We're launching our True for Construction. So actually working with construction sites so that they are zero waste and everybody's trained. And we're turning those, once again, by source separation, we're making sure those valuable materials are staying in that building industry and being recycled or reused over and over and over again.
Excellent. Thank you for that. This is kind of where I wanted to take us next, is really around what you're seeing on the horizon, and whether that's from enterprise involvement, industry involvement, but also policy involvement. I was asked a question today around what types of policies do you think would benefit most for the circular economy? And from my perspective, it was a reactive answer, but the easiest answer I think I could have given, mostly around cities and cities making purchasing requirements on maybe certain categories. I think that's a tried and true answer, I think, to establishing some amount of commodity in an industry. And so I think the example I used was around compostable or previously composted, or soil that was used from 100% compostable material.
Yes.
But how that would define an industry around that sort of local ecosystem, because it would force then everyone to take another look at all of the organics that were landing in the consumer organic space, but then also on the enterprise level. It now creates a whole new, again, commodity price for this now type of organic material. What do you see in terms of that landscape for policy? How would you have answered that question in terms of what is sort of the next policy endeavor that we can get signed, really move towards on the local or federal level that could really help us scale a zero waste / circular economic effort?
Yeah, so I think there's two pathways. One is the private sector pathway, and we've seen that where large companies like Colgate and Microsoft and Cisco, and many others have put out statements. We're going to be net zero, or all of our facilities will be zero waste certified by 2025 or 2030. And I think that's really important because it gives a direction to all the vendors. So Walmart, their supply chain, what they've been doing with their supply chain, if you want to do business, you have to be green. And so those policies are not only leading to zero waste, but regeneration, right? So they're not saying we're not going to cut down forests and use recycled paper, but we're going to plant more forests than we've ever done that. And then with legislation, it was really exciting during the pandemic. I know it was a trying time for everybody, but we had our busiest year in 2020, and 2021's even going to be even more, and hopefully 2022. But a lot of that is coming from all of the other wonderful environmental, human rights, social justice organizations. And I think everybody kind of had a time to quiet down and not be with all the busyness and running from conferences and meetings, which are important. But, organizations like Upstream Solutions, they're a younger organization, and the work that they have done in helping businesses implement reusables, but more importantly, the case studies that they've done, because zero waste is all about saving and making hundreds of thousands, if not billions of dollars.
Yep.
It's not about costing you anything, but about doing that. So with them, and we're all part of the Clean Seas Coalition, which is about 40 environmental organizations in California and beyond. So we pushed through, I think, over 10 bills this year, creating a circular economy.
Wow.
So that is just amazing.
Where would one find those resources of the bills that you all were working on?
Yeah, so of course you can go to the California legislature, but some of our partner organizations are Californians Against Waste. They are one of the leaders in lobbying. Surfrider Foundation, Heal the Bay, NRDC. So those organizations, we can definitely share some of those links. Even our own website, we have some articles on there. And many other states also follow that. And then on the bigger national and global level, there's the Break Free from Plastic initiative and policies, and a lot of those are tied with the United Nations sustainability goals. And then for the zero waste community, we have our recycling as infrastructure too. And it's a very robust plan that we're hoping will get slid in with the infrastructure bill. Because it's so important, right? We've been reliant on these other countries, and we shouldn't be. That's just shame on us. People want to keep saying, "Oh, China," that's shame on us. We should have robust reprocessing here in the United States, and we should be closing the loop, like you were saying before. The more we can keep it local, the better it is for everyone, with jobs, with keeping down air pollution, water pollution, and keeping those local economies strong.
This is fantastic to hear, mostly because this is actually how I got most of my start in the circular economic space, focusing on recycling and focusing on the domestic recycling economy. and both its successes, but a lot of challenges ahead of itself. I just so happened to be writing my graduate thesis at the time, right as China's national sword policy came to really hit the U.S. And for those maybe who are new to this, you can look up the national sword policy, but also its impact on the U.S. Recycling economy. We basically were shipping everything over to other countries. Trash.
Yeah.
Yes, trash. And to Stephanie's point, how are we actually now able to handle our own recycling and build our own infrastructure? Because again, to your earlier point, these are items of value. These are commodities of value. And if we treat it as such, we can actually use it as revenue generating, service revenue generating in many of our local economies. One of the most interesting answers I ever received from an interview that I was doing for my thesis research was around an exporter that was shipping recycling over to China. And it was an interesting tone I had to strike with a lot of these organizations, that as I was inquiring about their business models, inquiring about their supply chains, I had to take a tone of understanding that these people were actually losing their jobs. In a lot of ways, their shops were closing. But one of the most interesting answers I got was from a woman who said, you know what, this is really sad. I've really loved working with the people I've been working with. But I'm hopeful that this will force us to change. I'm hopeful that it means that the next company I work at will now be focused on establishing internal supply chains around recycled content. And that really then almost kind of in that singular interview redefined how I was focused on the recycling infrastructure in the United States around our circular economy, how important it is for it to be local. And I think it's just what you said really highlights that again, which is we can actually make this a very valuable loop in our own economy. And not to get too out there with this, but it's probably of national priority for us to establish our own supply chains around our own recycled content as our global economy gets more and more competitive.
Most definitely. And I think Ricoh Electronics was one of them that really, part of zero waste is making that supply chain really small and close, and there, there's challenges for both of that, because we all know, like our cars, it doesn't matter what brand it is. It has parts from all over the world in it. So it's never a US made car. It's a US assembled car. And assembled car, and even our computers and everything. So, there's always that balance. And of course, we're providing jobs for people overseas. But I think it's more about being aware and, it's producer responsibility. And I think that's another thing that's really stepped up, either through legislation. I mean, Maine now has an EPR program. Chile has one of the most robust EPR programs.
And real quickly, the EPR being extended producer responsibility.
Producers.
Yes. No. This is my job to really highlight to everyone else who's listening.
Yeah.
Yes. But these are really important bills that speak to corporate understanding of where their supply chains end and how to then really control the feedback loop of these materials back into their own processing. I interrupted your thought, but please finish that about Chile, finish that about how these EPR bills are actually being raised and are really important.
Yeah, so it's about the extended producer responsibility, like the actual legislation, but companies themselves taking full responsibility. We've seen a lot of that with electronics, right? I mean, HP is one of the leaders. Like, they not only take back every single HP product, their inkjet cartridges are like, 50% recycled inkjet cartridges, and the rest are, recycled water bottles. They're actually pulling, plastic from the ocean and incorporating that in. And we've seen that in clothing and everything. But I think what's more exciting is we're going beyond that. Even Patagonia, they're doing major studies on the lint that's coming off all their clothing, right? Because that's plastic pollution. But at the same time, those materials that are making that clothing that's well insulated, that's lightweight. So how can we not destroy all that or completely throw that out the window, but let's keep pushing ourselves to find that better solution and that better product. And at the same time, always going back to the more natural materials and finding them. Eileen Fisher is a really amazing company. They not only take back all of their clothing and they clean it up, resell it, donate it, but those things that aren't, like I've been to their remanufacturing site and all their wools, they turn them into new thread, their jeans. So it isn't like, some granola, like we're going to take jeans and patchwork them together. It's a factory, they put all their number 5 right leg jeans together and then make a new dress out of it.
I am so excited to see some of those facilities coming up. We've made sort of newer friends too at companies like Trove or Renewal Workshop, which are doing fantastic work in that space. So if anybody's interested in that, I'd check out those companies because they're getting a lot of traction. And also Renewal, I think, is another company that just popped up as well, who are, again, doing amazing work.
Yeah.
To round this out, for our first ever interview here on Multi-usiverse, where are we going? What are we really trying to get to legislation wise, in your opinion? Who's going to be the first actor here? Are we really relying on corporate action? Should be pushing more and more for legislative action? Where do consumers fall into this still, in your view? With those 3 players in mind, how do we really push more and more action in this space?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of, and it's always multifaceted of how we approach this. There isn't a silver bullet. We all have to do our part and all of that. I think with legislation, it's very important so that we have a level field for everybody to play in, right? But what's more important, once again, going back to electronics, like all the electronic companies want to do the right thing, but they can't have a law in California that's different than New Jersey, and then there's none in South Dakota. So we need federal legislation. And we really need to push our elected officials to get federal standards because it's going to make a stronger economy. So that's what we need to do with legislation. Also with legislation, what most people don't understand is, and having been an activist for way too many years, is there's usually no funding tied to legislation. Like we're just fighting to get that law through. And that's not fair to anybody. There's no funding to go out and find those people that are bad actors. There's no funding to create these new reprocessing plants or to create new economies that are based on our natural world. So we have to have the funding for enforcement and for innovation. And then
of which in those 2 thoughts, I mean, that's really important, is usually that regulation piece that many talk about. It's like, well, you're going to stifle innovation. It's like, no, we're going to just produce innovation in another way. And you're never going to stifle innovation. You can only guide it. It's a river of knowledge that will always flow. And so it's like, you just have to keep guiding it to a more sustainable future. And I think that was so key in what you just said.
Well, it's just like safety belts, right? Safety belts didn't harm the car company. In fact, it created a whole new industry. I don't know how zero waste it is of safety features on your car, Right. It pushed it that way. So I think we need to look positively. And I think that's something the zero waste community, the circular community, with businesses, that we need to talk about the positives, not the negatives. And then with our true certification, one of our selling points is if you're true certified, you are way beyond most legislation, right? You're already reducing, reusing, you're source separating, you're buying recyclables, you're being very conscious of the food that you're either serving to the public or to your employees and valuing that. You're engaged in your community. So, if you can either chase legislation and have to keep changing your programs every year because legislation is changing, or you can become a zero waste company, hopefully true certified, and you're years ahead. And
Yes.
of course, like LEED, we're going to keep raising the bar on our certification.
And I think that
And
speaks
then,
to the fact that it's not a destination.
no,
It really is sort of that we always live in that mantra of it's a journey. And that
yes.
you'll have to keep raising the bar as we can be better and better and better.
Yeah. And then I would say that two other key things are technology. I mean, it's so embarrassing where the waste industry is. Like, we're just now getting cameras and artificial intelligence in the bins. We're finally getting software programs so people aren't using spreadsheets. I always laugh, like one of our first companies, they were amazing, but they're farmers and they just scribbled their diversion on a piece of paper and handed it to me. But, why don't we have technology? Why don't we have an app for a zero reduction for reuse? And I know you're working on all of that. So I think, if we can drive technology into our circular economy, and it's there, but we need to do it a lot more. And we need to make it very accessible for every consumer and every employee. And then the other one is transparency. And I think that's the exciting thing, because since we can hide our trash in our recyclables and send it to China, we have to clean up our act, right? So and I might get their name wrong, but it's the Alliance for Responsible Recyclers, and that is led by EcoCycle and Eureka Recycling. And it's really about cleaning up the act, because most of your single stream recycling, there's 40% contamination in it.
Yes.
So these companies, they will only take your recyclables if they can close the loop.
Right.
If you can buy it back in a new product. And then there's a new organization called SWEEP, the SWEEP standard, and it is about certifying the actual MRFs, the material resource facilities, either at the city level or the private hauler level, certifying landfills, waste to energy plants, composting, that whole sector, which we really, we do get into and we have certified, but that's not our expertise. And so pulling back that curtain and understanding really what's going on. So I would encourage everybody to go visit your landfill, your waste to energy plant, your reprocessor, and get to know them. You know your supply chain upstream. Why don't you know it downstream?
And anybody too who's listening to this that doesn't know any of what we're talking about, who somehow stumbled onto this podcast, if you go to your local MRF, your local landfill, your waste to energy facility, you can't unsee what you will see there. And it will define, I think, the rest of what you might be pursuing in your own career or your own passion. I also wanted to touch on so many of the conversations I think we have typically result in us almost saying, hey, there's no shame in what we currently have, and really almost adding a zero shame to zero waste perspective is really important, because if you're coming in and being transparent with what your system currently looks like, I'm not going to be the one pointing fingers and being like, how dare it be this way? Let's all come together and create the solution. And so the zero shame aspect to that, I think, is really important. Well, I'd love to round out just as we close with, we want to get this going, which is a random act of reuse. And this could be a very personal thing for either of us. I'll get us started while you think of your random act of reuse. Today, I actually found a planter pot. I don't even know what to call it, in the trash in our local shared co-working space. And it had unfortunately a dead plant in it, and I took that out, but washed out the perfectly good potter and cleaned it out. And I'm actually giving it to my younger brother, who's got a plant that he's growing. But it almost starts with that willingness to be like, hey, this is actually still worth something. I want to actually reclaim this for my own needs. Do you have anything that comes to mind recently of a random act of reuse?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to live out in the country on 4.5 acres. And so, there's always a bunch of stuff just you're pulling out of the trees and the bushes. And
Yes,
what is that? So my reuse is really putting it out to my neighbors, like on Nextdoor, and saying, hey, I have this, or, my handyman that comes over, just hey, go look through my garage. What do you want? And it's that some person's trash is another person's treasure, and that's something that I've always really tried to practice. Is if I haven't used it in 6 months or a year, give it to somebody else before it gets ruined, right?
Absolutely.
Because we leave things outside, we leave them in our garage, in our closet, and they just start to degrade. So be proactive in giving that. And of course, so many people are in need right now. But make sure it's what they want. Sometimes we can give people things that they don't really want. So I just, it's kind of this open, like, hey, what do you need? I got all this extra construction or just stuff that who knows how long I've had it. Come take your pick.
I love that because it gets back to the heart of zero waste, the heart of sustainability, which is connecting with your neighbors, connecting with those around you to see what they no longer need, what you actually have for them. So absolutely, I think that's at the heart of what we're doing. Well, thank you, Stephanie. This couldn't have been a better first episode for us. And I've already gained so much more knowledge from what you were able to share, and hopefully anybody too can reach out and check out True. Check out if you are able and willing and really want to become a True advisor and be True certified. I highly recommend it. I know plenty of people in my network who have done that and love what they've learned. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.